Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of the Outlier Podcast. I've got a very close friend today joining me, Amit, with me. Hi Amit, how are you doing?
I'm well. Anurag, how are you?
That's a question we should ask each other. We are freezing, right? We are just freezing with this crazy snow that's going on in East Coast. It's freezing, but yeah, can't complain. Tuesday morning, Hudson freezing, sunshine outside. I can't complain. Good. Thank you for asking.
Excellent. Excellent.
Quick introduction who Amit is. Amit is CIO of Educational Systems, Federal Credit Union based in MDDC area. Spent almost 2 decades in community financial institutions, started with Apple Federal long time back, then moved on to a couple of community banks, and now again found his way back home, I would say, to credit unions. And now being the CIO of Educational. So Amit, firstly, thank you for taking your time out to do this episode with us. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Let's start, Amit, with your journey, right? So why don't you talk about your journey? What brought you to credit unions and how has been the last 2 decades?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to start. And again, thanks so much for having me, Anurag. It's a pleasure to be here. My journey in credit unions started somewhat serendipitously. So I have had the good fortune, like you mentioned, when I started at Apple almost 20 years ago. To this year. I wore many different hats at that organization. So I got to start out during college, started in the front of the office, and I managed in my time there to move to about 8 or 9 different roles at the credit union. So throughout that time, I had excellent managers who were willing to look within, promote from within, see a little bit of opportunity and potential, and really invest into that. And that's something I like to keep with myself as a leader because I've had many opportunities in that way. But really moved into IT about half of my time there. I've spent time in many different management roles and I moved around to a few other credit unions. I spent some time at Andrews. I worked at Sandy Spring Bank, which now is Atlantic Union Bank. Had a lot of fun managing a very large 3-year digital transformation there. And more recently, was able to help head up the acquisition merger with Atlantic Union, which was again a very challenging but endearing task. But all throughout my journey, I've had good opportunities, the chance to kind of grow each step of the way and help me get to where I am today. So, very grateful for that, and also looking forward to what the future holds.
Absolutely. We are so glad to have you joined us today and share your journey. Let's maybe peel the onion and talk about your point of views about bunch of things that we discuss always, right? So I mean, I'm a huge proponent of AI for a reason because I'm a data scientist myself. Let me ask you that credit unions I know are preparing for it, right? I mean, we are preparing for it step by step because it will take time for us to reach that position. So AI is everywhere, right? So talking about actual deployment versus still hype, right? How much is it true at education?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think there's a overarching desire to be doing something with AI, no matter what it is. And I think there's like a bit of an arms race to go to market with
Sure.
various things because as you see, it's like everybody's doing the same thing as everyone else. So how do you differentiate? For us, I think we're taking a bit more of a measured approach when it comes to AI adoption. Anurag. So I've been at educational systems since April of 2025. As soon as I joined, the first thing I did was develop a foundational AI policy for the
Yeah.
organization. It didn't exist. So we thought, okay, we need to start by building the foundation, putting some high level guardrails around how we use AI, and really what my goal is to make sure that it's not here to replace people.
Sure.
Rather, it's here to augment, it's here to make us better at what we do and really unlock potential, as well as make it so that we're focused on more value work. So there are several technologies I'd say we are adopting actively that bring AI from a third party perspective. But where we're looking to really make investment is on the agentic AI platform front. So I have under my purview an emerging technologies team. And their sole purpose is to focus on the tie between enterprise data management, software development, and artificial intelligence. And so, the three use cases that we are focused on bringing this year to our employee base is being able to, help augment and improve our new employee onboarding. At Educational, we call our employees ambassadors. So our process is new ambassador onboarding, but really making it so that you could rapidly come through conversationally, getting to all the policies, procedures, guidebook, everything that we do under the sun. We have all of this centralized in one place, but it's hard to really consume. So, very simple, low hanging fruit for us, which is going to happen in the first half of this year, is unlocking the power of AI and a digital interface to access that rapidly and just help with combing through mountains of data much more effectively. The second one that we'll be focused on is augmenting our contact center agents. So there's a lot of talk about contact center
Yeah.
modernization. That's something almost every credit union is doing with different providers. But as you kind of dig in under the hood, you find that the technology is very different. What we're looking for is low code, no code, goal focused, really built around understanding the process
Yeah.
as opposed to giving blueprints, fed to platforms to do a very clear and defined outcomes. So the other two use cases we're focused on is being able to augment our digital chat agents and our contact center agents with external and internal data sources, but be able to speed the quality of service that they're providing to members and non-members. And then we've analyzed and taken our top 5 channels, top 5 support request channels per actual data and volume, and are building those into a conversational AI agent, but one that we control in-house in an agentic platform and that we design and have control of as opposed to having a third party be the driver of all of that. So those are 3, I would say, major initiatives for us in AI that will come to fruition this year.
I think that pretty much touches both your ambassador slash employee and member experience and I think these are very valid and valuable use cases that you have picked up. So kudos
Thank
to
you.
you. I mean, I wish you all the best with
Thank you.
what you're trying to experiment. I think this should really work out, right?
There,
My next question is across, I would say, bottlenecks. I mean, I hate to call them bottlenecks, but still, we've got a bunch of legacy systems across the member life cycle, from cores to channels, right? I mean, everything is legacy. Now, if I were to ask you, Amit, about, as according to you, with your 2 decades in CFIs, where do you see is the biggest technology bottleneck today, right? Specifically for credit unions, and how are you planning to prioritize it, to modernize, rather, take it to the next level?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think there's several ways to look at that, Anurag. I mean, I have in my career worked with almost every large core provider. At Educational Systems, we are with Keystone Correlation, which is an interesting provider that I would say started as more of a growth challenger and has really gotten a great foothold in the
Yeah.
core space. But when you look at, there's no organization that I've joined that doesn't have some kind of technical debt in whatever the business technology stack is. Where you've invested, there are equal parts that we have not yet invested. So, I think the demand is always very high for this type of modernization. And oftentimes the bottleneck is simple capacity and resourcing. But the solution is not always to add more headcount. As we talked about AI, there are lots of ways to augment and go to market more rapidly with new capabilities. For me, it's all about usability and making enterprise investments and ensuring that where we develop and build a function that provides a service for a member or an ambassador, that we're able to effectively reuse that capability in other parts of our journey. And it's so important to make sure that what we're investing in can scale across the enterprise, fits in with our reference architecture, it talks to the other systems involved, and that we're not so dependent on third party vendors to drive our roadmaps. That is a crucial thing that I've seen. And in my time here, there's been a focus on making sure that we consolidate vendors where it makes sense, find the best solutions, negotiate, and really plan our integrations upfront in advance, and just have a good idea of what you're doing before you make the investments. I find that those kind of bottlenecks appear less and less if you plan more effectively up front. And, for IT leaders, it's all about communication. Being able to tell the story about what you're doing and why is so important. Understanding the business's challenges and getting them to partner with you on solving them It's just a much better experience when you come up front with as much of that as you can, as opposed to, hey, IT needs to do this and we're making this change. And, it's more about coming along the ride with you. And I find that you can reduce those bottlenecks through great communication, strong project management, a very good focus on process, and a lot of forward planning and enterprise thinking.
Got it. Absolutely. The next question I want to talk about is build versus buy, right? So, what do you think? I mean, how do you balance, I mean, the vendor ecosystem, basically your buy versus whatever you have built, right? Because there's a very thin line to both of them.
Yes. Yes, there is. And I think we're a digital first organization by nature, like so many others. Our intent is to be digital first with all of our investments that we make and ensuring that we can span what services we provide across the digital experience. So, part of that is really about having a very strong focus on products in my mind. When you think about the build versus buy decision, it has to be a concerted conversation and it has to come early. And it should start with the leadership layer, but in realistic ways, the body of knowledge that folks have is spread across a lot of our leadership. And the senior executives being in one room is a very important conversation to have, but you really have to lean on the SMEs across all of your divisions to pull the data together to make the best build versus buy decision. So, in my experience, I've developed strong product focused forums where when you introduce things at the top at ideation, you bring that into a forum where SMEs have the chance to talk about it. Talk about what we've already done in that space. Are we already doing this somewhere? Have we invested in this? Can this vendor handle this or can we build this in house? And we have a team that's dedicated to software development and is very involved in developing integrations. But again, if we're not very focused about bringing those conversations together early, investments can get made in silos.
Sure.
There's the advent of shadow IT. So, my organization, ESFCU, is about a little over 200 some ambassadors here. So we're not a huge organization,
Yeah.
which means we have the opportunities to come together and really talk about those things before we make commitments in a build versus buy. And it's often an outsource or insource kind of decision. But one other thing I'll add, Anurag, is we operate on a business system called EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. And that really is a business system that requires us to talk very often. We plan our goals and our targets on a quarterly basis, and that includes projects and initiatives that the organization is invested in. So it really front loads those conversations and ensures that we talk about that and
Yeah.
then bring together the right people to make those decisions. So I'm always a proponent of doing that analysis and making the best decision for the whole organization where we can.
I mean, these are very valuable points. Do you realize that? So, what you talked about in the last 2.5 minutes, it's very valuable. These are golden nuggets that should be taken out of this. This is very interesting. Let me ask you about maybe one decision because I mean, I'm a fan of talking about both success and failure, right? So the first question is success. So if I were to ask you about Amit, one decision that you've taken for your career might be, before educational, that's fine, because you're new here, right? That had maybe,
Yeah.
disproportionate impact on member experience. You're also working banks on profitability, on any other parameters that you want to touch on, right? Or any other part of the life cycle you want to touch on, right? So talk about just one experience might be that will be good icebreaker.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a good question, Anurag. I think back in my career at so many different junctures, and I find that I guess as you move through different channels and as you try to grow, it's often those decisions we make that really help us get to the next level in our careers. So for me, I think if I think about it from a career sense, I've always worked at credit unions, and as you mentioned, it's good to be back. But in my mind, one of the ways that I found the ability to grow was to step outside of my comfort zone, step outside of the credit union world, and take a chance somewhere where maybe I'm not as comfortable and doing something new. I find that, in most of my experiences, there's a high value put behind having additional perspective
Yeah.
and exposure to things that perhaps others haven't seen. And what I find in credit unions that's such a wonderful thing is that many people are in their positions and grow for a long time. But at the same token, they don't have the opportunity to step outside of that perspective in that bubble and be able to see things differently and be exposed to different challenges, different threats, different things to overcome. And so, probably my experience going into the community banking space for 4 years at an institution that was much larger than what I had done in my experience was a risk to me, and all of my peers were saying, "Oh, you're going to the dark side, good luck." But I found that to be very enriching because it gave me an opportunity to step into something I didn't know, learn to become fluent in a very large organization, and then help them grow to a level that they wanted to achieve on their strategy. And I really think that was a big part of the reason I was able to assume my role as CIO in my current credit union, because there's just so much more you get exposed to, different regulations, different lines of leadership, and just a whole different sense of responsibility. And so, even outside of just one single technology decision, I would say that kind of strategic movement is what allows, I think, aspiring CIOs to be able to move up in the food chain, so to speak. But
Yeah.
it's really important to get the right experience along the way so that when you get there, you have the right foundation to grow upon.
Yeah, I think that dovetails into my next question about advice, right? Essentially, so Amit, if you were to share maybe a couple of pieces of advice for aspiring CIOs in credit unions, for the lack of better words, what do you think? And
Absolutely.
so what do you think in terms of skills, right? Is I mean, I would say deep technical chops or your business leadership or data fluency. Let's take these three. So, what would be
Yes.
the most important pillar, or if you think all of them cannot work without each other, it's intertwined. So, what do you think?
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting question, Anurag. I've worked for several different technology leaders, and you can almost see what their backgrounds are in the way they lead and where their areas of expertise are. And I think that the thing that I learned the most is that you don't have to prescribe to any one specific strategy to get to that level of leadership. Different organizations have different needs, and what they're looking for in a CIO is not cookie cutter. There is a foundation that I would say one must have to be able to play at that level, but the mix of skills and core competencies vary a lot. I mean, if you look at me, like my background was in core banking, platform administration, business process. Then I moved into IT infrastructure, you know,
Okay.
cybersecurity, application development, and then really deep into enterprise project management before I actually got up to the level of CIO. And I feel that, at times, my last CIO was not even a technical IT leader, but he was a brilliant people leader. And his background was in mortgage banking, but
Yeah.
he had this knack to bring the right people together to build top performing teams, understand the challenges of the business, and really partner and work on how they can achieve their goals on a
Mhm.
longer term sense. So I found it really interesting. That was my first foray into seeing like you don't have to be necessarily a technical savant to be a strong CIO. But at the same token, I find that you don't want to, I also don't want to be too much of a generalist. There are things that
Oh,
I'm very passionate about in IT, and it's good to be fluent in the areas that you are passionate about. But for me, the people skills, the ability to communicate, the ability to see big picture and understand the business strategy, and really understand how does IT drive every part of that? And really understanding that IT can't scale or grow without success of the business. The understanding of the partnership is very clear in my mind. It becomes easier to translate complex IT initiatives into what is that going to do for us, or how is this going to help us achieve our goals? And I think CIOs really need to be focused on business outcomes and ensuring that the IT team is truly, lifting up the organization to reach those. And I kind of liken IT to the spine of an organization. And I say because it's the nervous center, it runs through the whole length of the organization. There's not anything that IT doesn't touch just a little bit or a lot. And so you have to be very responsive to what's happening and be able to quickly respond and react and be able to provide what the organization needs. And in order to do that, you have to have a really well balanced leadership style and a body of knowledge as a CIO, I think, to be successful. Always with a focus on risk mitigation, growth, and being forward thinking into the future.
Absolutely. So that was a very well-rounded answer. Amit, now, in the interest of time, I know you have to run. One last question, so if you don't mind.
Sure.
My last question is, all of us talk about successes, but not a lot of us talk about hardships or failures that actually make a person, right? So if I were to ask you, in terms of how have you tackled failures in life, right? Because obviously all of us have our own shares of failures or hard times. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. I mean, I have not met a successful leader that hasn't overcome some failure in their time. And I don't believe you if you tell me that you don't have a story there. It's just, it's really incumbent on us to grow as part of human growth, to experience failure, to understand the highs of success in life. You also have to encounter challenges and failure. So I try to keep a very open mind about it. In my mind and experience, so many folks are quick to say sorry or apologize when something doesn't go right. In the business world, it's not about that. It's more about how do we do this differently? What do we grow from? And how are we going to recalibrate to come out of this stronger? And I try to carry that mindset through my entire life and everything that I do. There's no reason to beat yourself up about failures. We've all had some major ones in our time. It's all about how you dust off, you recalibrate, and how do you come back to ensure that this never happens again, but also we're proactive instead of reactive in the ways that we structure our plans and our approach. So I try to think of failure that way, Anurag. And I know that sometimes, like they say in Agile, it's good to fail fast and even fail often. And, some of my favorite principles are based on don't be afraid to take risks, take measured risks. If you're going to have them, make sure that the impacts are mitigated and you learn from that quickly and you recalibrate and you move forward. And I think that's the best way that we grow as leaders and people is being able to do that. Don't get hung up on what didn't work. Absorb the lesson and move forward. And I found that to serve me well in my career.
Samit, firstly, thank you. Thank you for your time today. Really appreciate and thank you for doing this episode with us again, sir.
Absolutely. It was a real pleasure, Anurag. Thanks so much for having me. And I quickly want to give a plug to, of course, my peers, my organization, ESFCU. It's been a great time there, being there since April to now. Amazing growth here. We're excited for the future. And so I want to give a shout out to my CEO, Gerardo, and my peers, and my family, and my wife as well. Because I think being successful as a CIO in technology, you don't do it without having a lot of support at home, and it's really tough to balance those. But that's part of the balancing act and what helps us be successful. So look forward to talking to you again, Rod.
Absolutely, Amit. Thank you.